Breaking news tonight. It's a celebrity's nightmare. The so-called Ketamine Queen, who sells Friends star Matthew Perry that deadly dose of ketamine. Is she making a deal? In exchange for what? Is she talking to the feds, naming names? This as the so-called new Dr. Death, the doctor who was, quote, overseeing Matthew Perry's treatment, is back in his office? What? He's not behind bars. He's in his office treating other patients, aka victims. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. Thank you for being with us.
Did the drug dealer dubbed the Ketamine Queen refer to Matthew Perry by his friend's character name?
And that would be his affinity, Matthew Perry's affinity with Batman, and he would call himself Matman. But according to sources, the so-called Ketamine Queen, Jasveen Sangha, referred to him as Chandler in their texts and emails when they would talk about drugs and drug deliveries. Codename Chandler. Wow, that was a toughie. A lot going down in the Matthew Perry case. With me, an all-star panel, but let's just go back to reality. Listen.
Federal prosecutors allege that Perry first obtains ketamine from an unscrupulous doctor aiming to take advantage of the actor's addiction issues. Dr. Salvador Placencia teaches Perry's live-in assistant Kenneth Iwamasa how to administer the drug and provides ketamine to both Perry and Iwamasa at exorbitant prices. When the drugs become too expensive, Perry and Iwamasa turn to street dealers, including Jasveen Sangha, dubbed the Ketamine Queen.
What? There's a doctor who, by the way, is back in his office. Under one condition, he's got to tell his patients, aka victims, that he can no longer supply them with DEA-controlled substances. Yes, he's back at work. Matthew Perry is dead, and he is not in a jail cell. He is back at work. Let me understand exactly what's happening. But first, there's no doubt about it. In the last hours, a very dear and intimate friend of Matthew Perry says she doesn't think that ketamine is the cause of death. Why? And what would be the cause of death? And what leads her to say that? This is what the medical examiner has to say.
The Los Angeles medical examiner determined that 54-year-old Matthew Perry died from the acute effects of ketamine. Other contributing factors listed were drowning, coronary artery disease, and the effects of buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is used to treat opioid use disorder. The manner of death has been ruled an accident.
Joining us an all-star panel to make sense of what we're learning right now, but with me, a special guest, Rowena Chu, activist and former assistant to Harvey Weinstein. His name tastes like dirt in my mouth. Convicted on multiple rapes, and she has just written a New York Times guest essay, I Was a Celebrity Assistant. The power imbalance is very real. Rowena Chu, thank you for being with us. I enjoyed your article. I read it several times over, and I try to compare what you're saying and your situation with Harvey Weinstein, may he rot in hell, to Matthew Perry's assistant. Number one, Matthew Perry was not a criminal and was not a rapist, number one. But you point out assistants often do things that are, let me just say, legally and ethically questionable. In your case, what does that mean?
In my case, I worked for Harvey for only a couple of months, and so I didn't have the opportunity to do things that were ethically and legally immoral. But I was making the point that the power imbalance is so huge that assistants don't get the chance to say no.
You also pointed out a quote that compared assistants that may do illegal acts or unethical acts to the guards at Auschwitz, that they knew what was happening was wrong. And you make a very subtle yet important distinction. Explain.
The comparison was really with ordinary folks that lived in Nazi Germany, whether or not you can hold them accountable for the events that happened in the country. So I'm really making a point about bystanders that don't have any real power themselves, and they are essentially invisible, or they don't have an identity of their own, and they don't have the autonomy to make decisions. And so I feel that celebrity assistants, I also call them butlers, I constantly felt that I was invisible. I had no autonomy. I frequently didn't really have a name of my own. I would call people up and say, I'm calling from Harvey Weinstein's office, but I wouldn't mention my own name because I was that insignificant. So when you're in a power balance where you're that insignificant, I think it is incredibly difficult to be then thrust into the spotlight and held responsible for something as serious as somebody's death. I think that I am attempting to shed light on the fact that Kenneth Iwamasa may have had absolutely zero choice in a way that the ordinary person can't understand. He was a live-in assistant. The power imbalance would have been enormous.
At the end of your article, I noted that you stated it is often too easy to turn the butler into the scapegoat. Do you believe that Matthew Perry's assistant who injected him with that deadly dose is a scapegoat?
I think he may have been put in an incredibly difficult situation. Not only was his employment on the line, but likely his involvement in the industry as a whole. It could have been that he did not have another residence, and so as a live-in assistant, really there's a power dynamic on many different levels. I also think in the Weinstein case, at least, that there were many circles of power, enablement, and entitlement that were far more deserving of perhaps the legal system going after them than assistants. For example, Harvey Weinstein had accountants and board members that certainly knew of what was happening. So I think the assistants, I'm merely making the point that the assistants, I suppose, are the lowest rung on the ladder. And I think to hold them accountable and responsible for the actions taken by a celebrity doesn't take into account the enormous power difference between a celebrity and his assistant.
Rowena Chu is joining us, activist, former assistant to Harvey Weinstein, who has just written a guest essay for The Times titled, I Was a Celebrity Assistant, The Power Imbalance is Very Real. Miss Chu, I deeply respect you and what you have to say and your viewpoint, and I highly, highly disagree with you. In your case, or some other assistants, not necessarily Weinstein's other assistants, comparing that to what Iwamasa did in Perry's case, knowing that he had had seizures just 16 days where he was unable to move or speak after a ketamine injection, knowing that, I consider this much, much more serious. But I'll circle back to you, Ms. Chu, in just one moment. And again, I do appreciate what you're saying, but I find it vastly, vastly different than the case of Matthew Perry's assistant. Speaking of the facts, let's go to Kayla Brantley joining us, investigative reporter with the Daily Mail, who's been on this case from the very, very beginning. What I find very interesting right now is that it's all business as usual. Matthew Perry dies in the hot tub with a fatal overdose. The doctor is already back at work taking patients like nothing happened. He had to put up like a $100,000 bond. Really? That's $10,000 in regular people talk. You put up 10%. He's gone. He's out. The so-called Ketamine Queen has not been sentenced. The assistant, Kenneth Iwamasa, has not been sentenced. Why? I think that the feds, have you ever seen a cat with a little mouse just back and forth until it bites its head off? think that's what the feds are doing right now. They're toying with the various defendants in order to get them to talk, to name other celebrity doctors and other pill mills headed by doctors in LA and other celebrities. I think that's what's happening. But to you, Kayla Brantley, Daily Mail, tell me the latest. We've got the doctor back to work. A lot of people haven't been sentenced. The other celebrity doctors, including one that just got shot in the last day, a celebrity doctor, he was assassinated in his parking lot following all of the drama surrounding Matthew Perry's death and what's being uncovered. Hamid Mirshoje was shot in his parking lot. He was a celeb doctor focusing on addiction. But I bet a lot of celebrities and A-list doctors are quaking in their boots right now, Kayla. What's happening?
Yeah, Nancy. So what we know so far, at least when it comes to Matthew Perry, is that Dr. Salvador Placencia, he is back practicing. He is forbidden by the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, from prescribing controlled substances. He turned over his license that would let him prescribe, but he can still practice medicine under certain conditions. Now, he works at an urgent care in Malibu. And the only difference now is that his patients have to sign a written consent form for treatment that basically acknowledges and discloses that he is under investigation. It lets them know what's going on, but his patients can still see him. He can still practice. The only difference is that he cannot provide, lethal doses of ketamine as he is alleged to have done to Matthew Perry. And the same goes for Dr. Mark Chavez, who has also surrendered his DEA license and therefore cannot prescribe controlled substances. However, these men are able to practice, able to, continue living their daily lives. As you said, Dr. Placencia put up a $100,000 bond and he's out, but they will have to await sentencing and, see if they can continue to live their life or if they'll face some music.
Continue to live their life. Kayla Brantley, Daily Mail. Matthew Perry can't live his life, and he's not the only one. We now have identified two potential suspects, but two potential victims, other victims of the Ketamine Queen, both dead. But right now, to Mike McCormack, owner, lead investigator, MCM Investigations, former LAPD over 25 years. You can find him at MCM, M Mother, C Corpus, mmotherinvestigations.com. Mike, really? Yeah. Boo-hoo. He can't prescribe controlled substances. That's his punishment. He's back in his fancy sports car and his fancy condo and his fancy office to the stars, making money hand over fist. He can't prescribe DEA controlled substances? I guess not. But you know what he can do? He can illicitly get another doctor, a straw doctor, as it were, to write those prescriptions for him. Let me think of an example. Okay, psychologists cannot prescribe certain medications, right? They can't. Right. They work in tandem with a psychiatrist, and they get the psychiatrist to write the prescription. See what I mean? So He can be doing that. He can have a straw doc actually write the prescriptions. This is such BS. Why is he not in a jail cell? Perry is dead. And you know what? Everybody's talking about his net worth. In fact, his home is being remodeled near the hot tub. Man, that's going right on the market. It's like it never happened.
Exactly. This is a outcome of a lenient justice system, along with the fact that they're going to squeeze this doctor for additional doctors that are doing this, or sources.
You only die when you use needles. Matthew Perry's ex makes a shocking claim about his needle phobia, casting doubt on his ketamine death.
The doctor directly implicated in Matthew Perry's ketamine overdose death is still practicing at his Calabasas urgent care clinic. Dr. Salvador Placencia's clinic is open, but must advertise the details of Placencia's current felony case at the front door. Placencia still has an active medical license. However, the doctor has had to surrender his DEA registration number and is not allowed to prescribe controlled substances. Dr. Mark Chavez has been subjected to the same restrictions.
Boo-hoo! As I said, this doc is back at his luxury practice in his luxury condo in his sports car, living the life. Matthew Perry is dead. How can that be? Joining me, psychoanalyst to the stars, Dr. Bethany Marshall, author of Deal Breaker, and you can also see her on Peacock and find her at drbethanymarshall.com. Dr. Bethany, I want to circle back with you about how this doctor can continue treating celebrity patients with the use of a straw doctor, how easy that would be. But we now know this doctor knew very well that Matthew Perry had actually seized up. In other words, he could not speak or move for an extended period of time, just 16 days before he died. Yet, everything was business as usual. Listen.
Details of Perry's last days in a federal indictment reveal it was very clear to Dr. Placencia that Perry's ketamine injections were causing a total loss of awareness. The indictment documents 3 separate occasions where Perry froze up after receiving the medication, with Placencia commenting, "Let's not do that again."
Defendant Placencia knew full well the danger of what he was doing. In fact, on one occasion, he injected Mr. Perry with ketamine, and he saw Mr. Perry freeze up and his blood pressure spike. Despite that, he left additional vials of ketamine for defendant Iwamasa to administer to Mr. Perry.
And he's free. If you or I caused the death of a superstar like Matthew Perry, we would be under the jail. So why is he free? And why is it very murky, very unclear as to the status of the other defendants? Because the feds are squeezing them to talk. That's why. Joining me, Todd Bar, Dr. Todd Bar, board-certified anatomic clinical forensic pathologist. I'm very curious. Oh yes, he's also featured in Thin Places essays from in between. Doctor, thank you for being with us. I've been researching and investigating what exactly happened to Matthew Perry when he, quote, froze up. That's hardly a medical description, but I've learned that there was apparently a significant spike in his systolic blood pressure. What does that mean?
Hi, Nancy. Thank you. So a spike in his systolic blood pressure just means that he is having a hypertensive crisis. His blood pressure is elevated to a point.
Okay, right there. What do you mean hypertensive crisis?
That means his blood pressure is at a high level, such a high level that it could cause death. I mean, people die from extreme fluctuations in their blood pressure. Blood pressure is supposed to live in an average, in a normal range. If you get too high, it's hypertensive. If you get too low, it's hypotensive. And either of those, hyper or hypo, can cause death.
So when he, quote, froze up, what does that indicate to you? Is that some sort of a stroke or a near stroke? What's a systolic spike in blood pressure?
I would say the term froze up to me sounds more like a seizure-like activity, like a tonic-clonic seizure where the muscles contract and you get into this. Ketamine is actually known for its anticonvulsive properties. It's used to treat seizures, but in high doses, it can actually cause seizures. And as we know by the reports that are out there, Mr. Perry was administered extremely high doses of this drug ketamine, which is an anesthetic drug. He was actually found with the levels that were compatible with surgery and that, anesthesia that you would need for surgical procedures. So he was
It reminds me a great deal of Conrad Murray injecting Michael Jackson with propofol, and it took, hell and high water to get Conrad Murray charged and convicted. But even that conviction was not enough to send sufficient shockwaves through the celebrity doctor network in Hollywood, and now Matthew Perry is dead. It's Kayla Brantley is joining me, investigative reporter with the Daily Mail. Kayla, I understand that the doctor who is now living a life, he's not in jail like everybody else would be connected to a death, he would provide the medication, the ketamine, along with the Ketamine Queen, for the assistant to make at-home ketamine injections. Now, I heard what Rowena Chu said, that the power balance is way off. But shouldn't you know instinctively, especially after Perry was having seizures just days before, that you should not be injecting ketamine to Matthew Perry at home? I mean, this assistant needs to be in jail along with the doctor and the Ketamine Queen, the street supplier. They all need to be in jail, and we need to know their sentences. So what's happening, Kayla? I don't understand. What's the holdup?
Right. Well, Nancy, I also want to break down exactly how much ketamine was distributed to Matthew Perry. The doctors, Chavez and Placencia, distributed 20 vials of ketamine to Perry for $55,000 in cash. That's charging him $2,000 for a vial. And that vial cost Dr. Chavez just $12. So you can imagine how much money they were making off Perry. And that's the point that the prosecutors were making. Now, the Ketamine Queen, Sangha, she sold about 50 vials of the drug to Perry, with Fleming delivering the product. That's Erik Fleming, the Hollywood producer. And they sold it to him for $11,000. So these people were making a lot of money off of Perry's addiction. And they clearly knew, as you said, he was seizing up. And then you had the person who was injecting him, who was his trusted assistant. So you make a great point that, these people should be held accountable. And that's exactly what the prosecutors are trying to do.
They distributed approximately 20 vials of ketamine to Mr. Perry in exchange for $55,000 in cash. Defendant Placencia saw this as an opportunity to profit off of Mr. Perry. He wrote in a text message in September 2023, quote, "I wonder how much this moron will pay." He also stated in text messages that he wanted to be Mr. Perry's sole source of supply. He wrote in a text message that he wanted to be Mr. Perry's, quote, "go-to for drugs."
Please join us on our mission to find missing people, especially children, to solve unsolved homicides. If you're on the go, catch us on your favorite podcast app, where you can get all of our content, where we, in our own way, seek justice.
Matthew Perry's assistant allegedly found Perry in similar circumstances 2 times in the same week of his tragic death.
Joining us, Rowena Chu, former assistant to Harvey Weinstein, who just wrote a New York Times guest essay, "I Was a Celebrity Assistant, The Power Imbalance is Very Real." You just heard other examples that celebrity assistants have named. Do you believe that in this case the assistant is being scapegoated, or do you believe he is rightfully being prosecuted as it relates to Matthew Perry's death?
I do believe he's being scapegoated. I mean, we just heard about how other players in this system are making insane amounts of money. And I ask you to think about, what does the assistant stand to gain? In that equation,
what does the money have to do with it, Rowena?
Well, there's an incentive for
Would it
both
make
the
it okay if he was paid more money?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I'm not saying that anybody was doing anything right. However, there's a big difference between the amounts of money the doctors and the drug dealers were making and what did the assistant stand to gain. I believe the assistant was just trying to survive. He wasn't making staggering amounts of money. And so therefore his incentive to do what he did was very different from the doctors and the drug dealers. He wasn't out there trying to get something for himself. He was merely trying to survive his job. There's a big difference in that.
So you believe the difference in whether he should be held criminally culpable is whether he was getting paid for shooting
No,
Matthew Perry
I
up
think
to his death?
I don't think that there's a huge incentive for him to push this agenda, and therefore I don't believe that he was pushing the agenda. He was merely doing what he was told to do under incredibly strenuous circumstances. So I'm merely saying that as a point of coercion, the assistant is not really this person who should be scapegoated, that there are layers of privilege and abuse of power that are far greater than that. And, you know, we can easily point to doctors and drug dealers who were making vast amounts of money and had a huge incentive to push this kind of an agenda.
And are actually still making vast amounts of money. Mike McCormack joining me, lead investigator of MCM Investigations in Hollywood. Mike McCormack, all respect to Rowena Chu, but I think that's complete BS. I don't agree at all. Everybody in Hollywood is making money off celebs. Celebs are making money off the studios. The studios are making money off us and advertisers. That's how it works in Hollywood. It's like one bloodsucker sucking on the next bloodsucker, just like ticks, stuck to the animal. But Mike McCormack, why aren't they in jail, number one? And what do you make of what Rowena is saying, that the assistant is the scapegoat? I think they should all be put in the same pot to boil and all be tried together as it relates to Perry's death.
Well, I don't think the assistant is being scapegoated. I just think he was being more loyal, just doing what the boss wanted him to do. It had nothing to do with money. It was job security and loyalty.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Dr. Bethany Marshall, maybe I'm not articulating my point that well. The assistant lives in a mansion. He makes plenty of money. He rubs elbows with all of the stars. He drives a beautiful luxury car. Maybe I'm not understanding his poor conditions. I don't see it.
Nancy, I have a unique perspective on this because these assistants sometimes come to my office. One in particular was the major domo for one of the wealthiest men in the world and had to stand around serving palomas to the family all day long, alcoholic beverages. And he became so disgusted because one of the family members was drunk all day long. He was traumatized. He came to therapy and said, I just cannot do this anymore. And he left the job. So yes, these assistants are vulnerable in the sense that they often do things they don't want to do, but they do have agency in the world. And I think in particular, when you are potentially committing homicide, that's a breach of duty. That's lack of judgment that a 10-year-old knows not to do, right? We just know basically you don't kill somebody. If you administer a drug, they seize, you don't administer the drug again. I mean, I'm sorry, but this assistant could have gone and worked at a bar. I would prefer to scrub floors than to inject somebody with a substance that could kill them. It is just common sense. Of course, there's a power imbalance. Of course, there's a power imbalance in life for all of us when we need something,
Exactly.
want something, right? But we don't exploit
Kayla
it.
Brantley, I want to follow up on what Dr. Bethany is saying. Kayla Brantley joining us from Daily Mail. Kayla, we understand that Matthew Perry's mansion is being renovated, especially around the hot tub, the pool area where he died. It seems as if for Hollywood, including the prosecutors, it's just business as usual. The doctor is back in his clinic, treating patients, making a ton of money. There are no sentences on the people that have agreed to plead guilty. It just seems as if everyone's acting as though nothing happened. Matthew Perry is dead. These people, according to the feds, are responsible. Why aren't they behind bars, Kayla? And what, if anything, can you tell me about when these people are going to jail? And one other question. Apparently, one of Perry's intimate friends states that he, Perry, was deathly afraid of needles, and she is questioning the real COD. Killa, listen.
One of Perry's former assistants and ex-girlfriend, Katie Edwards, says she does not believe Perry could have possibly been taking ketamine. Edwards describes Perry's intense fear of needles, saying he wouldn't even consider a tattoo due to the phobia. Edwards was no stranger to Perry's addiction and told him he would die in an argument over his drug use. Perry's response, quote, "You only die when you use needles, and I would never, ever do that."
Kayla Brantley, what about it? This person, an intimate friend of Perry's, raising the specter of another COD cause of death.
I understand that, Nancy, but it was Katie Edwards. She dated him back in 2006, worked as his assistant until like 2011. So while they were still friends, they hadn't dated in a while. And I understand that she said that he had a fear of this, but Matthew Perry himself had written in his book about these ketamine infusions that he was taking and how it felt and how it was helping him. So I personally am not so sure of that theory. And you do have his assistant and everyone basically admitting to injecting him. And back to your point of why aren't these people, behind bars and what's going on? I think right now it's just a waiting game. We have had plea deals, which have gotten us more information from the assistant, from the friend, from one of the doctors. So I think we will be seeing more in due time. There will be a sentence. They will end up facing the consequences of their actions.
The feds say there are likely more victims of the infamous Ketamine Queen.
Apparently, celebrities and celebrity doctors alike across Hollywood are quaking in their boots, afraid that the so-called Ketamine Queen is going to rat them out in exchange for a sweetheart deal from the feds. The so-called Ketamine Queen, the one that supplied Matthew Perry with the deadly dose of ketamine that ended in his death. Are there other victims? Yes, listen.
Jasveen Sangha sells Cody McLaury several vials of ketamine. Later that same day, McLaury's family finds him dead. A family member tells Sangha her ketamine caused McLaury's overdose death, and Sangha Googles, "Can ketamine be listed as a cause of death?"
There are likely more victims. Erik Fleming, who reportedly acted as a program director at the Bel-Air rehab Red Door, also had a resident die on his watch. William Cooney, 36, was found dead of a fentanyl overdose in his bathroom at the facility.
So those are two alleged victims, two more victims of the Ketamine Queen. That makes three if those two victims are to be believed. In fact, Cody's family is speaking out against the Ketamine Queen. And is she making a deal with the feds to get a light sentence in exchange for ratting out other celebs and other doctors? Man, she needs a lot of money to support this lifestyle. So what is the connection between the Ketamine Queen and the other alleged victims, all dead?
Coming to light are Brooke Mueller's deep ties to suspects Fleming and Sangha. Mueller spent time with Sangha in one of her many rehab stints, and Fleming is reportedly a godfather to one of Mueller's children. Mueller reportedly pressured then-boyfriend William Cooney to join her at pal Fleming's rehab program, where Cooney overdosed and died. Mueller may well have introduced Fleming and Sangha to Perry as shortcuts to feed his addiction. Federal prosecutors report that Mueller is cooperating with the investigation and is not facing any charges.
Let me understand, Kayla Brantley joining us from dailymail.com, the so-called Ketamine Queen, Sangha, meets up with who in rehab? Now, let me see. It's Brooke Mueller, who apparently was very close to Matthew Perry. Now, how does that connect into Sangha, the dealer?
Well, all roads are kind of leading back to Jasveen Sangha, the Ketamine Queen. She was a supplier of multiple people, and now we do find this connection between Brooke Mueller, who spent time with Matthew Perry in rehab. They were close friends. And then we have Erik Fleming, who was a director at the rehab center where this man, William Cooney, had passed away. So this all is a circular connection of going back to Sangha. And Sangha has been on the radar for a while. Back in March 2024, the feds raided her house and they called it a drug emporium. They seized 79 bottles that some had tested positive for ketamine. So this is no surprise that Jasveen Sangha is involved in this Matthew Perry case now.
2 more alleged victims of this woman living the high life that supplied the deadly dose to Matthew Perry. Now, would he be her 3rd victim? Why is it taking that to bring her to justice? Are those investigations ongoing now? This, by far, is not the first time a celebrity has died with enablers circling them like vultures. Listen.
Now an emergency. Hi, how you doing? This is security from Beverly Hilton. Hi, what's going on? I need the paramedics. Apparently, I got a 46-year-old female found in the bathrooms. That's all I've got right now, but they're requesting paramedics. Oh, okay. Female found in the bathroom. What room is she in? I'm not sure. She fell or she was in the bathroom with the water. 434? I'm sorry. That's room 434? Yes. Okay. And it's not east, west, or anything else? It's room 434? Yeah. Okay. And you don't know if she's conscious of breathing at all? Apparently, she wasn't breathing, and she's 46-year-old. She was not breathing? Yeah.
Whitney Houston surrounded by enablers. Ultimately, it cost her life. Then there is John Belushi, one of the greatest comedians that ever lived. He was shot up with drugs at the Chateau Marmont, and his assistant did hard jail time after shooting him up. Bobby Christina, Whitney's daughter, OD. It goes on and on and on. Of course, Michael Jackson, Aaron Carter, Chris Farley went to rehab 16 times. His younger brother finds him dead in his apartment. Of course, Prince died of a deadly opioid injection. Goes all the way back to Elvis. China, Amy Winehouse, Anna Nicole spiraled down a drug hole while everyone supported that and enabled her. Kurt Cobain, River Phoenix. It goes on, and the enablers are never brought to justice. Straight out to Mike McCormack, MCM Investigations. Don't you know the Ketamine Queen and all of them, they're like rats on a sinking ship, are ready to deal, ready to name names, addresses, phone numbers, little black books to save their own skin. You don't think they're talking to the feds right now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're gonna tell them everything they want to know to stay out of jail.
As we go to air, we learn that there are vultures circling Matthew Perry. Yes, his clothing, his wardrobe, his sofa, and other memorabilia reportedly up for auction. Again, like vultures circling a carcass. This, as we learned, there's a hold on sentencing for some of the defendants that have already agreed to plead guilty. Why? Why? And why is his doctor the one that allowed the fatal dose that killed him? Why is he back at work as if nothing happened? Business as usual? Joining me, an all-star panel to make sense of what we know right now. Do you believe, Kayla Brantley, that this signals the beginning of a celebrity and celebrity doctor crackdown?
I think it's very possible, Nancy, especially now that we have people who are making plea deals. You could see them speak and tell, their networks of people and connections. And this could be the crackdown, the beginning of a bunch of doctors who are prescribing people deadly medications. We have from the police so far, people admitting, including his assistant, to covering up and cleaning up the scene by getting rid of syringes and ketamine vials. That's according to the plea agreement, and telling each other to delete things. So we see an orchestrated system from these people who are trying to get away with clearly knowing that they did something wrong.
To Todd Bar joining us, Dr. Bar, board-certified anatomic clinical forensic pathologist. Dr. Bar, what do you notice about the death certificate?
So, Nancy, I have a lot of real issues with the way this case was decided. As a forensic expert, I have been involved in prosecutions of crimes that involved other people distributing or administering drugs to a victim. The very definition of a homicide is death at the hands of another, period, whether it's by omission or commission. In this case, commission. They brought in drugs, they injected them into Matthew Perry's body. They should be charged with a homicide. They should be charged with murder, straight up. Everyone that's involved. Now, the second part of this is the official cause of death was listed as the acute effects of ketamine. And then other conditions or contributing conditions included drowning. Now, there are certain stigmata of drowning that you see at autopsy. If those are present, then a drowning occurred. So Matthew Perry's death is literally because of drowning. But then there's a part B, or drowning due to the intoxicating effects of ketamine. So he was so dissociative and anesthetized that he slipped under the water. If they're going to list drowning as a contributing factor, then that means they had evidence that he drowned. So it should have been listed as a drowning number one due to the effects of ketamine, and the manner of death should have been listed as homicide. So I have a very strong opinion about the way this death certificate was worded, and I believe that sometimes when it's worded this way, defendants get off a lot easier. Now, I don't know if in LA they have something going where they word these death certificates in a way so people get off a little easier, but that's my take.
To Rowena Chu joining us, former assistant to Harvey Weinstein, now activist, who has just written a New York Times guest essay called "I Was a Celebrity Assistant, The Power Imbalance is Very Real." Thought to you, Rowena, what do you make of it all?
I think there are levels of power that we could go after that are much more intense than that of the assistant. I think the assistant, being the lowest rung on the ladder, probably is the last person that anyone should go after because he has very little autonomy. I'm not saying that no one should be held accountable. I'm saying that there are levels of power above him that should be accountable before he is.
Guys, we wait as justice unfolds in Matthew Perry's case. But now we remember an American hero, Trooper Aaron Smith, Indiana State Police. Smith, a United States Army National Guardsman receiving 2 life-saving awards, survived by wife, Megan, parents Patricia and Gary. American hero, Trooper Aaron Smith. Thank you to our guests for being with us, but especially to you for joining us tonight, along with our MSM family, tonight and every night. Nancy Grace signing off. I'll see you tomorrow night, 6 and 9 o'clock sharp Eastern, and until then, good night, friend. Please join us on our mission to find missing people, especially children, to solve unsolved homicides. If you're on the go, catch us on your favorite podcast app where you can get all of our content where we, in our own way, seek justice.